Okay, the Mr. Duff actor here, standing behind 2000 Aprilia Pegaso 650. Noticed on the internet there's not a great deal of aftermarket support for these bikes here in the US, but long story made short, I've normally ridden dirt bikes my whole life and street bikes, building bikes, and have a couple brother-in-laws that have been getting into this dual sport thing and convinced me to look for one, and I ended up picking up this bike for a good price. The fellow had trouble keeping it running, ran really bad, so decided to sell it, and I ended up picking it up for $1,250, so $1,250, knowing it had some problems. But he said that before that it ran great and had trouble with it sitting out for a long period of time. So it looked kind of like it'd been sitting out for years, and brought it home. Did a little bit of testing with it, took the seat off. It's got twin McCuney carburetors, and ended up finally kind of getting it started, but I couldn't hardly keep it running, so I took some carb cleaner and sprayed in the throats of the carburetors, and it would rev up and run a bit, so I knew it wasn't an electrical problem. So I thought, well, I'll spend a little bit of time with the carbs, and I pulled them off and took them all apart, and there were bugs inside, the fuel bowls, just a lot of varnish, and both pilot jets were plugged solid. So I spent a lot of time, probably 3 or 4 hours, going through those carbs, making sure everything was open and working good. And put it back together, put the carbs on, and it fired right up. And rode it around a little bit, and I was surprised. Brakes were good, suspension was good, it didn't overheat. And I thought, wow, what a steal. I had a little bit of an exhaust leak, but ran pretty good. You know, this bike was originally jetted for sea level, so I started working a little bit on the jetting, and actually left the pilot and the main jet stock, but found that it really didn't perform very well on the low end at all. It had to be revved up to about 3,500 to 4,000 before it really started making any power. And I'm here in Utah, and we've got trails all over that are, some of them pretty steep, hard to get around. You got to be able to have good low end on one of these heavy bikes. So I ended up dropping both needles, one clip, and tried it out, and it was a lot better. In fact, we went up through Kennecott Copper Mine area, and as the higher I got, the worse it ran, so I knew it was too rich. So I dropped the needles one clip, and gosh, ran a lot better. So I thought, you know what, I wonder if I can go one more. That would mean that I would drop the needles down to the very lowest setting, and you know, it's pretty rare that you have to do that, but I did it, and man, the low end is great on this bike now. It's a little anemic on the top end, but there are some other aftermarket needle assemblies that I might try that have a little bit richer top end and a little bit leaner on the bottom end, which would work really great for here in Utah. So we'll try that out, but long story made short, I've got some plans to try to build this bike up into an adventure bike on the cheap. So right now it looks like I've got a filter, oil filter, changed the oil, went through the carbs, spent about $3 or $4 on carb cleaner, a little bit of time and elbow grease, and I've got about $1,300 into this bike right now. It cost me $100 to register it and inspect it, so about $1,400. And as is, it performs really quite good right now. It has good tires. So we're going to see the transformation of this bike over the next months into hopefully a dual sport bike that's pretty capable. But I've got two brother-in-laws, both of them ride KLRs, and I know they've got about $6 or $7 grand to buy each of their bikes. So right now I've got about $5 grand to play with, is the way I look at it. And you know, we've done the mod for the carburetor on those, the needle mod, where the 22-cent needle mod, where you raise it up a little bit, helped both of those bikes. And that's kind of what I'm kind of comparing this bike to, is the KLR, and we'll have a little bit more comparison as we go along. But a couple things right out of the gate that I really like. One is saddle height is lower than the KLR. I'm only about 5'9" or so, and so it's really nice for me to be able to get my feet down on the ground and maneuver some of the trails around here, and that's a nice feature. The second thing is this bike, I'll take pictures later, but it's quite a bit narrower than a KLR, and it's very nimble. It's a very nicely built bike. It's got a Rotax motor, and pretty reliable, they say, as long as you take care of it. So we're going to see how that goes. And the other thing I need to mention is I decided to change the rear chain. I put an O-ring chain on it, a 520, and so I guess that's about another 80 bucks. I failed to mention that, but the other one was pretty corroded, but it was still working fine. It was an O-ring chain, but it's kind of dirty because we went riding here last week on it. So I'm going to do a couple things tonight, and then update the video blog here on the Aprilia 650 Pegaso here in the States. And you're going to find that I'm trying to adapt some KLR stuff onto this bike. So for those of you that are struggling trying to find parts for it, I could build stuff, but I'm going to try to see if I can use some existing stuff available for other bikes. Got a couple things on their way, so I'll kind of update the blog as we go along. So happy riding, everybody, and as Mr. Rojoneck says, live and ride, or live free, ride or die.